shit! Yo, what is up guys, it's TyrantX1 here and welcome to another game review. This time I am doing Rayman Origins, a 2D platforming game that was created by Ubisoft. Now, the story of this game is that Rayman and his friends are just nicely chilling one day. Then suddenly their snoring apparently interrupts someone else's life, and they get so pissed off they send an evil army to destroy the entire world, and pretty much Rayman and his friends have to stop that person. And by doing so they have to rescue all the nymphs and kings of each of the lands, and then basically by doing so they open a portal to another area to then stop whoever has been causing this. Now, for story, it's not really supposed to be, this game isn't really supposed to be really story driven, it's mainly supposed to be a comedic type game, and that's really what it does. And it does that pretty well. If you're really looking for an interesting and, driven story, you come to the wrong place, because this is more about the way the game is, the way the game works and the level designs, and it's more about the challenge really is this game, since this is supposed to reenact how some of the games were back in the 90s and early 2000s, which games that were supposed to be pretty damn difficult, the old 2D platformers that were quite difficult back in the day, and this was supposed to replicate that feeling. And Rayman Origins, I think mostly overall, does actually replicate that difficulty, since over time the more you go throughout this game, the different worlds that there is that you go to, it does get more difficult as time goes along. Since newer enemies are introduced, and obviously the way the levels are designed also become more difficult to do. Not only that, there's about 10 or so worlds overall, along with a secret world, depending on how many collectibles you've gotten. And yeah, it'll keep you going for a good amount of time. I'd say this game will take you at least 9 to 10 hours to do, depending on how well you're skilled at 2D platformers. Depending on your skill level, it can be shorter or longer. It really does depend, honestly. So, and then there's the characters themselves. You have Rayman and his friends to help out along the way. This game is full play split screen, but it isn't online co-op, sadly. So you can have up to 4 people playing at a time on split screen, but there's no online capability. But there is different characters that you can be in the game, and there's really not that many when it comes to different Rayman variations or even Glowbox variations. They're really more on the teenies. There's more variations on those kind of guys, and pretty much most of the character variations are the teenies, and it kind of does suck in some way, since there's only 3 different Rayman variations to play in this game, and that's really it. So the character customization is a little bit disappointing, but really I think overall the way the levels, well, not the levels, but the way the story goes out is fairly okay. Compared to most other games in the past, it actually does fare well. Now let's talk about some of the mechanics of the game. Now of course throughout the game, throughout each of the worlds, you gain a new power. You can either run on walls, you can fly, you can swim, you can punch. Hell, that's a bit weird, you need to get a power up so you can punch enemies. But yeah, most of these powers are sort of basically to help you out in each new area of the game. And you can go back to the other levels with these powers, so at least you get to keep them throughout the game. And of course, the game gets more and more difficult because of these added on powers, meaning there's more things that can get in your way, and the levels can be designed in a different way for those powers to be used. As wall running, jumping, well, not jumping, but flying, punching, and swimming. Of course, these will make the game more difficult, and there'll be more variety in level design over time. The way the levels have been designed is actually pretty decent, since each world does represent represents a different sort of an environment, like a jungle, desert, a ocean, mountains, an ice yeah, sort of like a frozen snow region, but they also represent something else. Like like these worlds also represent like music and food and some sort of other things I don't quite understand. But yeah, each of these worlds represent a different environment and a different sort of subject or object, and it's actually pretty interesting. The way these worlds have been and levels have been designed is actually very interesting. And honestly, I think they were doing very well with these worlds, and I really did like the way they were. They were fun to go around, and it's also not only that, there's also collectibles to find throughout the levels. Because there's these little things called electrons that you need to find, and of course there's like secret areas to find that are hidden away that you need to use with your powers to help find them. And these can be quite interesting since they're quite challenging, because you have to free them from, because there's like a certain amount of enemies that are shielding the cage, and then you have to kill each one of them. And these can be quite interesting, trying to find out a way to basically free the electrons. So yeah, and each of the levels that is like each of the worlds have their own sort of a flying sort of mission, where you can fly in this mosquito dragonfly thing. And these are really fun parts of the game, because you basically have to, you know, avoid enemies, fly through obstacles, avoid stuff. I really liked the flying missions, and they were done pretty well. They were probably pretty much one of my more favourite part of the game. But yeah, of course, like I've said, the levels do get harder over time because of the additional powers you gain. And so the world will start changing to adapt to those power changes. So yeah, I think overall the levels have been done particularly well. Like a level could be be more about jumping, more about flying, more about avoiding enemies. So yeah, the way the levels have been designed in this game has been particularly done very well. Now there is different enemy variations in this game, because each world has their own different kind of enemies. Like there's enemies that will be obstructing your path, and enemies that will try and attack you. Now you can only get hit maximum of 2 times, because you can get like an extra heart kind of thing, which can help you out throughout the level. But the max times you can be hit is pretty much 2 times, and you're basically done for. So you really have to be nimble and cautious when you're trying to when you're trying to fight against enemies. I mean, the attack you have is very strong, since most enemies would die within 1 hit. But some enemies you cannot kill. Like for example, the jellyfish that are in the ocean, you can't kill those enemies that will obstruct your path. They can't be killed either. So you really have to learn when to either kill an enemy or avoid it. And yeah, the enemies can definitely get in your way depending on the setting of the level, and of course when you're basically trying to fight them, because there can be a lot of enemies at time to fight, more so than usual. The enemies do get tougher over time as they become more smarter and more tougher to fight against, especially when you get to the final world, where it becomes pretty damn impossible to kill enemies by punching them. You have to basically knock them off the you have to knock them away into a certain object or some sort to destroy them. And yeah, the enemies in this game can be quite tough depending on the situation and how to avoid them. And the boss fights too, at times depending on what you can do, they can be tough themselves, since you have to sort of hit a weak spot on them and sort of know what path they're going, since they can add a certain difficulty, since each boss is a little bit different, and so there'll be different problems to deal with when you're fighting against them. So the boss fights are pretty they're not samey, luckily, compared to some other games, and they're not boring either. They can be quite challenging, which is what this game is mainly designed to be. It's mainly designed to be challenging, and I think the way the game has been done particularly well, because when games try to make things difficult, they just basically throw in more enemies, or just, yeah, basically that, or just for the most difficult enemies out here. This game is a little bit different. They actually try to make things more difficult as time goes on by changing the way the levels are and changing the way the enemies react. And obviously that's how you do a difficulty level difference. Since there is no difficulty level to change, they basically have to make things tougher by introducing more difficult enemies to fight and making the level designs more tricky as time goes by. And they've done that particularly well as Ubisoft. And so yeah, overall I think Rayman Origins is a pretty decent 2D platformer, to be honest. It certainly reminds me of the older games in the 90s and early 2000s when games back in those days tended to be quite difficult. Like Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Crash Bandicoot. It reminds me of those kind of games. And yeah, I think Rayman Origins is done particularly well. So overall, I'm going to give Rayman Origins an 8.5. So that's my review of Rayman Origins. I mean, I might have missed out saying on the whole skull teeth things, where you have to gain them so you can go to a special level, but other than that, I think Rayman Origins is a particularly decent 2D platformer, and I think it really should be played a bit more often, unless, by all-time fans of the old Rayman games. So, hope you've enjoyed this review, leave a like, subscribe, and I shall see you guys in the next random video.